All right. Well, we don't seem to have a big turnout. Again, I think we're competing with actual birding. Now that we have our meetings during prime evening birding hours, it's not like the winter when we're the only show in town. But welcome everybody. And Brody, it's great to see you here. We haven't seen you in a while, so it's fun to have you back.
Yeah, I've had baseball for the last couple months.
Very good.
Yeah, also a very worthwhile activity.
Yep.
Can I just add one thing? I
Sure.
was out birding, and we have 2 owlets here in our canyon, and they were screeching at each other for the last hour. So that's where I was, and I was able to find one. And its eyes seem to be getting bigger and bigger. It's very cool. And the talons are huge.
And do you know, are these great horned owls, or do you know what species they are? Neat.
Great horn.
Okay, well, I see that Jessica has joined as well. Hello, Jessica. Thanks for
Hi, John.
being here.
Yeah, of course. Great to see you guys.
So when you last joined one of our meetings, you were Jessica Nielsen. Are you Jessica Gray now? I see that in your.
Oh, yes. I've just gotten married. Yeah. So
congratulations.
Thank you.
On. There you go.
Okay, well, I'm just going to go ahead and jump into the meeting then. I know that you have potentially a ticking clock at your end, Jessica, since you're caring for a young child, and we can't ask them to mute themselves and wait while we finish our Zoom interaction. So, but welcome everybody to this meeting for Carpinteria Birdwatchers for Thursday, June 16th, I think it is. So tonight's meeting is going to have 2 parts. We're first going to talk about the nesting of snowy plovers that's happening on Carpenteria State Beach again this year, which is very exciting. And then in the second half, we'll talk about wrens, the wren species you can see in Santa Barbara County. And as a special guest, we have Jessica, you want to say Jessica Nielsen, Jessica Gray, who now I don't know your official title or what your status is. Can you maybe just share briefly what it is you do out at the Coal Oil Point Reserve,
Sure.
or what you do with respect to snowy plovers?
So I work out at Coal Oil Point Reserve, which, if you're not familiar, is a reserve that's owned and managed by UC Santa Barbara. And so it's just a couple miles up the coast from the UCSB campus. And my role there is as the conservation specialist. And so my main responsibility is managing the snowy plover recovery program, which has been in place since 2001. And so 2001 was the first year that we installed plover fencing and signs and started the docent program to educate the public about plovers nesting on our beach. And that was also the first year that we had successful plover nesting in about 30 years. So it was immediately successful, and it's been doing really well since then. Every year has its challenges, but my main role is doing the monitoring and managing the docent program for that program.
Awesome. And I'll just say I had extended an invitation to April Randall, who's with the California State Parks and is kind of performing a similar role for the various places in the state park system, but at the Carpinteria State Beach in particular. And unfortunately, she's not going to be able to be here. So you are our only official plover expert. So we're going to be peppering you with questions.
Sure, happy to answer any questions.
And so I'm going to run through. I made a presentation of just some slides of the snowy plover nesting happening this year at Carpinteria State Beach, and I'm going to go through those pretty quickly with the hope that if people have questions for Jessica, or just questions about the snowy plovers in general, we'll have time to ask her about that before we go on to wrens in the second half of the meeting. But everyone, you're encouraged to stay muted while we're doing stuff, but you're also welcome to unmute and just interrupt if you have questions during the discussion. Jessica, you're especially encouraged to interrupt, and when I say things about plovers that are completely untrue, or if I may ask you questions as we go, corrections are very appreciated. And just, the more time I spend out there watching these plovers, I realize I'm on a very steep learning curve, and I imagine that, you with all your experience are well beyond where I am in terms of plover knowledge. So it'd be really fun to get those insights from you.
Sure, that sounds good.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and start up let's see, how am I going to do this? I'm going to share my screen. All right, so with any luck, you are seeing a snowy plover now on your Zoom screen. Excellent. Okay, so I'm not really going to recap the whole recent history since we've done that in other meetings previously. But basically, snowy plovers have started nesting again at Carpinteria State Beach. They had not nested there since 1960 until 2 years ago. There was one failed nesting attempt, and then last year there was a successful nesting that happened there. This year they are back and nesting again, and this is a pretty rough map that I've prepared. It's not super accurate, so but since we don't have April here, I was hoping she could like point out inaccuracies, but we'll just accept this map as a rough version of reality. But this is Carpinteria State Beach, and these blue lines show the sort of suggestive fencing that's been put in place, just the little rope lines to kind of ask the beachgoers to give some space to the plovers and not go in there. And I just want to say, sort of as an aside, we've been doing docent shifts out there on the weekends, and I'm just really impressed with the way the campers in the campground have really embraced the plover restrictions. They're being shoved over into one little piece of beach when they previously had access to a lot more beach here. And everyone that I've talked to about this has been okay with it. Like they're interested. Once they learn about the plovers and they see them running around, they're very on board. I've had really positive interactions. So that's been very fun to see. So this year so far, there have been 9 nesting attempts that I know of, and I've tried to sort of color code them here. And I'm actually going to talk about each of them in turn. So I'm going to go through the history of each of the nesting attempts. So it's going to be kind of going over, they overlap in time, but I'm not going to really pay attention to that part. I'm just going to start and talk about the first one through its whole process, and then the second one through its whole process. It seemed, I don't know, more straightforward. But basically, there have been 3 attempts that resulted in eggs that hatched. That was nest 1, and these are in chronological order. So the first nest that happened, the second nest that happened, nest number 2, and the third one, nest number 3. Each of those resulted in plovers that actually hatched. Only nest 1 produced actual successful fledging, successfully learning to fly and leaving the beach. That was nest number 1. Nest numbers 2 and 3, all the chicks were unfortunately predated. We don't know exactly in every case what happened to them, except that they didn't make it. And in both of those cases, it was the first week seemed to be the really difficult time for them, because that's when they disappeared. Then there were these kind of interesting nesting attempts, 4, 5, 6, and 7, none of which made it to hatching, some of which only had a single egg. It was sort of, they're kind of interesting. We'll go through them in detail, what really happened with those. But then we had 8 and 9, which are active nests currently being incubated with 3 eggs each, and those are due to hatch in a couple of weeks. They seem to be doing well. So got my fingers crossed that we will have more successful plover fledging off the beach this year. But just in general, with only 1 nesting attempt last year, and so far 9 of them, or 3 that have actually hatched out eggs so far this year, and 2 more hopefully to come. It's a really nice trend in terms of plover breeding recovery on this section of beach. Okay, so I'm going to zip through these, and again, I'm going to go pretty fast because I want to have time to chat with Jessica about your much more advanced plover nesting program up there at Callender Point, or any insights you have into what we're seeing down here. So this was the first nesting attempt back on March 21st. This nest was discovered and exclosed, the little anti-predator cage put over the nest. The female parent in this case was a banded bird, P-A-Y-B, which is my favorite snowy plover ever, because I've seen that bird a lot over the years, and she's been at the Carpinteria State Beach a lot. She was the bird that made the first unsuccessful nesting attempt back in 2020 at Carpinteria State Beach. And then I think successfully nested last year up at Callender Point. I think you may have told me about that, and when I emailed about it, Jessica. And then she came down, and she was the female of the pair that made this nest. hatched out 3 chicks. 1 chick was lost to a crow. I think this is the only case of a lost chick where we know what happened. I think April or someone saw that the chick was actually taken by a crow. But the other 2 chicks made it and were last seen flying around and last seen at the end of May. So here is PAYB. So pink over aqua, yellow over blue is the color combination that gives the bird its name. And this is the first time I saw this bird back in 2019, just a few months after she had been reared at the Santa Barbara Zoo rescue program and released up at Callender Point. I noticed at the time she had this dye on her head, this sort of magenta dye, and the word I heard was that, oh yeah, they did that in the zoo as part of the plover rearing to sort of identify the plovers before they banded them. Does that sound correct to you, Jessica?
That's correct. Yeah. They don't like to band the plovers until they're just about to be released because they don't want them in captivity too long with those bands, just in case anything happens in captivity with those. And so in the meantime, they identify the birds by different color magic marker. Basically, it's like a non-toxic marker that they color their heads with.
So I thought this was really interesting in part because, excuse me, here's actually the one I want to show. So I went back and I sort of remembered this bird as just having magenta dye, but then I went back and looked at the photos I took that day back in 2019, and I realized, oh, there were actually different colors on this bird's head. So there was magenta on the sides, but then there was this kind of greenish in the middle. That was, to me, that's kind of interesting, and it sort of faded a little bit, but I thought this was interesting because I came across this video that I hadn't seen until like a week or so ago, and I'm going to go ahead and play this. This was put out by the Santa Barbara Zoo late in 2019, and I'm pretty sure this shows the batch of babies that PAYB came from, so it's a fun little video, so I'm going to go ahead and play that now. So I'm suspicious that that might be PAYB because it's kind of got the blue in the center and the magenta on the sides, sort of, not sure. And then that bird shows up again at the end of the video. Right there. So I thought that was fun. Let's see, accidentally continue. There we go. I'm not sure that's the right plover. I don't know. I'm kind of curious in your opinion on this, Jessica. It's, these outer photos are the photos I took on the beach in Carpinteria in September. The central picture is a screenshot from that video. Kind of has similar colors in similar places on the head, but the later shots, the colors are also fading, and the overall effect is darker, like the exposure is different in the images. So I don't really know, but
yeah, it's tough in the field because usually they start to fade a bit.
Yeah,
I'm having a hard time seeing if there's the red on both sides or the magenta on both sides on the one from the beach, but
yeah, it looks like there's a little, it's like this is the left side, this lower right-hand image. I feel like there's a little bit of magenta still there.
Yep. I think it could be the same one.
So anyway,
really
that's
cool.
That's just sort of trivia. I was just excited, because again, I'm kind
You're
of
like, I know that bird.
I'm a fan of this particular bird, so it's fun to see that. Oh, actually, I have an earlier image of that bird. Anyway, so this is a later image. So this is from November of last year, and the last time I did a talk about the snowy plovers, which I seem to keep doing, I showed this picture and talked about how, oh yeah, so PAYB was back on the beach in Carpinteria this winter, and maybe she'll come back and breed again next year. And lo and behold, that's exactly what she did. So this is the nest on the nest number 1 in that map I was showing you earlier. This is from March of this year. I think that's probably PAYB incubating on the nest inside there. Here she is off the nest, so we were able to see the color combination and confirm that that was the same bird. Here is her mate, the male plover. And one thing I think I've become significantly better at actually distinguishing the breeding plumage males and females. Like I can't always do it, reliably, but when I can see them both together and we have a limited number there on the beach, so we can kind of keep track of who they are. I feel like I'm getting to where I can sort of recognize the darker auricular patch, you know, seems to be the males, or bigger black forehead patch. Here, though, is female bird PEYB back on the nest just prior to the hatching. Here is one of the chicks a day after hatching. Here's one of the chicks about 10 days later. And at this point, we were down to just 2 chicks because, again, one of them had been taken by a crow. But those 2 remaining chicks, they really seem to stick together a lot. And I don't know how typical this is. Again, I have limited experience with plovers, but it seemed like those 2 chicks were hanging out together a great deal on the beach. I saw them together all the way up until they fledged. There they are with their male parent. PAYB had left the scene at this point. I'm curious, Jessica, have there been any reports of that bird up at Coal Oil Point that you know of? Or is that maybe you just don't know off the top of your head, like you don't keep track of every individual bird?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. We do track band sightings up at the reserve. I have been on maternity leave for a little bit, so I'm not as in touch with what we've seen in the last couple of months. But we definitely were seeing that bird a lot last year, and he was visiting, or he was visiting during the summer, or the winter, last winter. So
I can hear your own
sorry.
fledgling.
He's with Dad, so he should be fine. But we'll
yeah, tell Dad to channel his inner snowy plover, where the males
exactly.
provide the bulk of the care after the hatching. So
but that is pretty common to see the siblings stick together. Like even past fledging, I see them kind of hang out in the same general area, and like kind of huddle together sometimes. So they definitely have that connection, which is pretty cute.
Yeah, this pair definitely did that a lot.
The wind in this picture.
Yeah, so this was May 8th, and there was this big wind event, and it's going to come up in some of the other nest histories too, because it had a dramatic impact on a lot of the nesting that was going on. But I was out there mainly to look at what was going on with this other nest that had been discovered just shortly before this. But I also got these photos, and it really brought home to me, you know, when it's really windy and the sand is blowing across the beach, you know, it's not a very hospitable environment for people. But for plovers who are down there, you know, an inch off the sand, it's got to be just brutal. And these photos, I think, kind of show that you know, I hadn't really thought before about what it's like for a plover out there on the beach when the wind is really howling. But you can see they were definitely getting sand blasted. But they made it okay. Here they are a little bit later, a week and a half later. And this, I think, is the last day that I saw these 2. They were already flying at this point. So it's, I guess, not even technically certain that it is the same 2 birds, because I guess once they start flying, you know, they could leave and other birds could fly in. But they were 2, you know, juvenile plovers of the right age hanging out together in the same spot they'd been hanging out for weeks. So I'm pretty sure these were the same pair. But as I say, this was the last day that I saw them. So they have moved on. And that takes us to nest number 2. So this was discovered sometime around April 19th. So just about a month later than nest 1. So it's sort of behind nest 1 by about a month in its timeline. And again, it takes them about a month of incubating and then another month to fledge the babies successfully and get them off the beach. So, or you know, away from that location by flying. But this hatched out 2 chicks. It was a nest with only 2 eggs in it. One of those chicks was lost within the first few days, and then the second one was lost a few days after that. I heard a, you know, second or third hand report that someone said a hawk had taken one of them, and there have been, you know, a family of red-tailed hawks kind of hanging out in this area. So I don't know if that's what happened, but pretty sure that we lost both of those chicks pretty soon. But here is a photo of, I think, the male parent on the nest shortly after it was discovered. Here's, I think, the female bird on that high wind day. So again, there's blowing sand obscuring the photo. There's a few days later with the bird off the nest, you can see the 2 eggs in it. Here are the 2 chicks shortly after they hatched. A few days later when we were down to just 1 chick. And then this was the last day that I saw this chick. So that it seems like, again, that first week is really high mortality rate for these plover babies. They're just kind of walking around, and anything that fancies a quick snack that spots them, there's not much they can do other than just hide. And then nest 3 was discovered on May 5th. So again, a pretty significant gap between each of these 3 nests being started. Here is one of the parents on the nest during that really windy day, May 8th, sand blowing across. Here is, I think, the female parent on June 4th, and this is like 2 in the afternoon, and I think this is a baby plover. This was basically a day or 2 after the predicted hatch date, so we were keeping close tabs on this nest, and I think that's a young plover there, that dark area. And here's another angle, an hour or 2 later, and you can see the eggshells. So clearly something has happened to these eggs. And then, yeah, a few minutes later here, you can actually see one of the babies right there. So the next day, this was just a 2-chick nest. And this was the last day that I saw them. They only made it a few days. It was interesting, both parents were still hanging around and associating with the chicks. So that was June 5th. On June 6th, I wasn't there, but April was there and didn't see any chicks all day. And I got there on June 7th and was there for a number of hours and didn't see any chicks. And I think these were the parents. They were still hanging out right in that same area. And again, we don't have that many plovers on our beach during a lot of this time. So it's somewhat easier to keep track of individuals, even though most of them are not banded. And that brings us to these unsuccessful nesting attempts. So the first of those, well, unsuccessful in terms of not even making it to hatching. So the first of those was discovered actually by Jenny Slaughter, who was going to be in this meeting. She's a member of Carpinteria Birdwatchers, but she got a last-minute approval to go out and do birding and some sort of survey, I assume birding, at Big Pine Mountain, which is very cool. So the Forest Service gave her access, so she's on her way there now, I think. Anyway, she was texting me just for the meeting. She was very excited about that. But I was going to ask her about the discovery of this nest. So she and Craig Murray were out, and they came upon this nest, which was outside the fenced area, so kind of in this main passageway that the campers use as they come in and out from the campground. So it was a definite concern. There was this nest with a single egg in it, right where everyone was walking, that this would be a problem. They were able to get some suggestive fencing around it, some poles with some tape. Not the official fencing, but a reasonable facsimile. But unfortunately, the very next morning is when that high wind event was happening, and that nest was buried by the blown sand. April came out the day after and excavated the egg and replaced it in the nest, but the parents didn't incubate it, and she eventually retrieved that. And I guess, I didn't hear all the details, but I think she took it to or someone took it to the plover recovery effort at the Santa Barbara Zoo, but the egg was not viable. But the female bird in this case is the second of the 2 birds that are actually banded that we've had on the beach there this summer. So we know her history. And Nadia from the Santa Barbara Zoo sent me this email with details. So this was a bird that was hatched and rescued from an abandoned nest at Oceano Dunes, so up in like the northwest corner of Santa Barbara County, or up into San Luis Obispo County, and and was released at Coal Point last July. So similar to when PAYB attempted to nest, Carpenter State Beach 2 years ago, this was a first-year bird that was trying to nest. So this is that nest that Craig and Jenny discovered the day they discovered it. I went down there to see what was up with that and saw that they had put up that fencing, which was great, except the next morning there was all this sand being blown, and this is the nest the next morning. So if you look, it went from this to this in the course of a few hours. Here is the female parent, PYRR, so pink over yellow, red over red, dealing with that wind-blown sand. And then, so I guess what April did when she excavated eggs, she placed it in the nest, or she kind of made a depression to kind of recreate the nest with the pointy end up. And it was explained to me that this is sort of a practice. They can see if the adult birds have returned to the nest, because the adult birds will reorient the egg so it's horizontal. Does that match your experience, Jessica? Is that a known thing?
I've actually never used that technique, but I like that idea. It's a good way to do it. I usually use I'll like dust the area around, which after a windstorm it's already kind of dusted, and I'll come back and look for plover prints leading to and around the egg. But I like the idea of putting it pointy end up, because they will change the orientation of the egg if it were like that. So I'm gonna remember that for the next wind event.
So in this case, the egg was never reoriented, and again it was removed but found to be no longer viable. But not to be deterred, the same female bird, PYRR, attempted a new nest a day later. Was discovered, and again this was right on the edge of the fence line. I think it was either outside the fence line or just inside. I think April adjusted the fence line outward to encompass this new nest, but it was very close to the high tide line, which created a concern that this one probably is going to have a problem with the tide. And sure enough, a few days later it did in fact get washed out by the high tide. But this is that nest when it had a single egg in it. And there is parent on the nest. And here it is with 2 eggs in it on May 13th. You can kind of see, this is the view of the ocean on our left in this shot. And here's the nest right here. And this kind of, this little berm here, that's basically, something being created by the high tide. And you see the nest is right on the edge of there. Here is a bird on the nest on May 14th, and it was washed out, I think, that night. But PYRR tried again, or at least had another egg that she laid, because she created a new nesting attempt way at the back end of the fenced area. I think there was only ever a single egg in that nest. And it's not really clear to me what happened there. Maybe she was ready to lay another egg anyway when her earlier nest with the 2 eggs got washed out, so she had to find a place for it quickly. I don't know the imperative of plover egg laying, if she's got to lay one somewhere, and so this is where she laid it, or just what went on. But she laid that egg there, but then nothing else ever came of that nesting attempt. There was I'm pretty sure a different pair of birds that started a nest here, and I don't actually have any photos of that one. And I heard again, kind of secondhand, I think April said something about that it looked like there had been signs of human disturbance of the exposure. So that's obviously very unfortunate and unusual, since that's the only thing I know of that's happened like that, and we've been keeping pretty close tabs on these nesting attempts this year. But in any event, that one also did not make it. Now that leads to nest number 8, which was again PYRR. So this is a very persistent first year bird. Like, she tried a nest here that got covered by wind. She tried a nest here that got washed out by waves. She tried a nest here that didn't ever really make it. But then she tried a nest here, and the 4th time was the charm, because she did successfully get 3 eggs into that nest. And you can all sort of see it. It's hard to tell because in this photo, the 2 eggs on the right are kind of overlapping, but there is sort of an edge of an egg there in the foreground. But there are 3 eggs in that nest. Here she is settling in to incubate those eggs. This was this morning. I was out there, and there was an interesting interaction with some killdeer. So I haven't been talking about it, but there's been a killdeer nest in the same area of the beach, and they hatched out 4 baby killdeers about a week ago. And it's made for these very intense squabbles between the plovers who don't want anything coming near their nests and the killdeers who don't want anything coming near their chicks. And the chicks are wandering through the area with the snowy plover nests. And so you get these pretty exciting interactions. So this is PYRR doing a distraction display to a killdeer that's out of the shot. And there's another shot of her trying to get that killdeer to leave the vicinity of her nest. Here she is incubating this morning. And then finally, the last nesting attempt that's also ongoing currently. It's going to back very close to the area where the first nest happened this summer. Here is the female bird on the nest there. Here is the male parent on the nest. You kind of see a little piece of an egg there underneath him. So this is on June 4th. This is one of the newly hatched, I think these are like 1 or 2 days old, these killdeer babies. This is a baby killdeer that has just wandered up to the nest. And again, this produced all kinds of excitement with the killdeer doing distraction displays and the plovers doing distraction displays. And, you know, I realize it is stressful for the birds, and it's not a good thing that they put their energy into this, but at least as a bird watcher, it was kind of fun to see. And it kind of took some of the tension out of it to know that neither of these were actually likely to harm the nests or the babies in question. But there was lots of excitement shortly there. This is actually PYRR, that bird from nest number 8, flying past the killdeer there. And just lots of excitement. And here's the common enemy that they should be uniting to distract. And I think actually when I've seen crows wander through the area, they do kind of forget about the killdeers or the snowy plovers, and they get more concerned about the crows. Actually, I wanted to ask this. So I know, Jessica, from looking at some docent materials, that up at Callender Point, there have at times you've actually issued slingshots to the docents for crow deterrence. Is that still a thing? Is that something that actually happens up there?
Yes, if we do have a high level of crow predation, we will, if the docents are comfortable, they can use a slingshot, not to hit the crow, but just to shoot it in its general direction to kind of, sometimes harassment can work well to deter crows from an area. So if they're, you know, continually being kind of like harassed away from the plover area, in the past that has worked to deter crows. In the last 4 or 5 years, that has not worked as well at our site, but it could potentially work at sites where they haven't gotten used to us. But the predator exclosure cages have gone a long way in keeping the crows from eating the nests. So that's great that you guys are using those.
Yeah, and it, you know, again, it's a little less nerve-wracking as a docent, at least standing by when this crow is, you know, clearly interested in that you know, that cage and potentially in the nest inside it. You know, knowing that it can't get in there. But again, once those eggs hatch and those babies are running around, it's a different story. Mm-hmm. You know, do you have any recommendation? As you know, in a couple of weeks, we're going to potentially have 6 more baby plovers running around on that beach, and we're going to be out there docenting. What can we do, you know, when there's a crow kind of wandering into the area?
You can try to kind of distract it away. You can, I mean, maybe talk to April and confirm like what strategy she would want you to use. But yeah. I mean, the harassment technique could work. We've had issues with crows for years, and we've tried like every trick in the book. Another thing that helps sometimes is you can buy on Amazon like a fake crow that looks real enough, and you can hang them from trees or places nearby, and just that effigy alone can sometimes deter them from coming to the area. And that's, you know, a non-invasive way to keep crows away. But yeah, harassment and putting the effigies out can help. Another thing, because it is near a campground, it's important to make sure that trash cans and things like that always have a lid on them. You know, anything that can attract crows to the area needs to be under control. So yeah, lids on trash cans, making sure that trash is always picked up. Anything you can do to keep them from being attracted to that area can help.
Yeah, I know that from the training that they gave us at the state park, you know, it is very much there's a hierarchy. You know, it's we are part of the state park system, and they are, happy to have us there, but it is also like we have a certain role that we must make sure that we, go through the proper channels, that we're not out there attacking crows or doing things that have not been
Right.
approved as part of the management process. And I can imagine that the contingencies are a little different. Like out at Coal Point, you have a lot of visitors, but you don't really have the campers. And we have, these campers in place right there. And, it's the state park and it's kind of their beach too. I mean, the campers are, again, I think being very generous about giving a little room to the plovers. But certainly the management practices and the decisions around that are going to be, they're going to have different factors in mind than maybe what you have up at Coal Point.
Definitely. And it's a little more in the public eye in front of the campground. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if
throwing
an
rocks
effigy
and
of
things might not fly.
might send
at
the wrong
campsite.
message. Yeah. or a dead crow on a pole, or what looks like a dead crow on a pole
Yep,
may not really
absolutely.
add to the
So-
ambiance of the campground.
So I think the best that can be done is, controlling any trash and food that might bring them to the area.
And that's actually a really useful thing, because we do have time to do a lot of education out there with these campers, and they're there for multiple days. So,
Mhm.
we can train them up and it can actually have a real impact. It's not
Yeah,
like we're
that's
just,
really cool. And I'm sure a lot of these campers are not just one-time visitors. They probably come here every summer with their families. And so even if it may feel like you're educating new people every single day, there's a good chance there's a lot of people coming back and that will remember how to respect the plover habitat.
Yeah, and I actually had a contact with someone last weekend on my shift there who said just that. She had been here last year and saw the plovers there and was excited to see that they were back. So we had a
Cool.
great time talking about that. And this is I just like this shot, so I put it in at the end. But that's basically it for my recap of what's been going on. I'll stop the screen share so we can see each other again. I mentioned if people have questions for Jessica, this would be a good opportunity to ask. I mean, I've been asking questions already, but do others of you have plover questions? Yeah, Paul.
Do they migrate?
They do. So their range is all the way from Baja, Mexico up to southern Washington. And so we have seen banded birds like at Coal Point Reserve, for example, that have come all the way from Oregon. So they definitely do migrate. Some migrate farther than others. Others we see all year round at our beach and they don't ever leave, or maybe they might pop down to Ledbetter Beach in Santa Barbara or Carpinteria for a day and then they'll come back the next day. So some like to stay where they are and others venture a little farther. So I think just kind of depends on the bird.
And I'm curious, what's the latest trend there at Coal Point? How are your nesting numbers this summer compared to previous years?
This has been a tough year with predation, both crows and skunks. So I don't know if you have any issues with skunks at the state park. If you don't, you're very lucky.
I don't think we have a skunk issue. I've seen raccoon tracks on the beach though.
Okay. So raccoons will go after nests, but I think I've probably seen one raccoon predation at our site since I've started 7 years ago. So raccoons haven't been as much of an issue as skunks. So with the crows, we start using the predator exclosure cages, and that goes a long way in protecting the nests from crows. But with the skunks, the small skunks or the young skunks can actually fit in that mesh size, which is amazing. They just squeeze right in, kind of like rats are able to squeeze underneath a door. So the skunks can squeeze in if they're small enough, and sometimes they'll even dig under the exclosure cages. So there are times where we have to debate, whether we need to remove the exclosure cages because the risk from the skunks is higher than the risk from the crows, because a lot of times the skunks will start to key in on those cages. So this year we've had crows and then skunks, and so we're trying to bounce back from that. And actually the issue with the skunks this year was bad enough that we were doing the egg replacement technique where we once an egg is laid, or once a nest is laid, we collect the real eggs, replace them with fake wooden eggs so that the parent continues incubating the nest. And we take the real eggs to our incubator at the reserve. And when they're about to hatch or when they're just starting to hatch, we return them to their original nest so that the parents can still raise the chicks in the wild. And that's worked pretty well so far. So that's kind of an extreme measure we've taken because the skunks were eating everything. And so we did get permission last year from Fish and Wildlife Service to implement that technique if it did get really bad with the predation.
And, I was mentioning before about, interventions and the decision-making, and the bureaucracy behind all that. Like, it's very important. I mean, as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act, you have to get all of this approved. There has to be like, you don't get to mess with these birds. Just, it's not like you just get out of bed and go, oh, I'm going to start, pulling these eggs out. It's like, no, you have to go through an approval process to make sure that people review that and authorize it.
Absolutely. Down to the, the predator exclosure cages, even, we have to send the exact dimensions of what we're planning to put out, the mesh size, the materials, just so that the biologists at Fish and Wildlife Service can kind of double check and, make sure that there's nothing they can foresee being an issue or anything that could potentially harm the plovers. So yeah, there's a lot of oversight, and I think it's really, really good thing to make sure that we're all thinking through all the potential trade-offs for what we may be doing to help protect the plovers.
Yeah, I see you got a hand up, Tom.
Yeah, Jessica, first, I've been to Colo Point many times, and that was the first place I ever saw a snowy plover. So I really, really appreciate what you all do there. But do you have any strategies for protecting the young once they've hatched, or do you just kind of watch and see what nature does?
So for us, we do try to intervene if we see any avian predators during the day going after chicks, just, trying to wave away a hawk or wave away a crow. At nighttime, it's difficult. Sometimes we have owls that go after chicks, and there's not a lot we can do in that instance. But another important thing is making sure that the chicks are able to stay near their parent. And so for that, it's really important to make sure that human disturbance is minimized. So a lot of people see the fenced area and assume all the plovers just stay in their little cage in their fence. So that's often a misconception. We try to educate the public that the fence is where the nests are, but actually once the chicks hatch, they spend most of their time in between the fence and the ocean because that's where all of the food is. So usually once you make that clear to people, they understand to kind of tread lightly and look where they're stepping, because the chicks can get separated from their parents if they get scared away, or if the parent gets disturbed and flies off, the chicks can get separated from each other and maybe not find their parent again. And that can also be a problem for the chicks if they're not able to reunite with their family. So at the state beach, I would think that would be a big one, is letting people know about the feeding areas and that kind of thing. And pointing out the chicks always goes a long way. You're right. They see
Absolutely.
how small they are and how fragile.
And I have photographs that I bring with me.
Oh, that's perfect.
And when I can't find the chicks, this is what they look like. So people always go, oh my God. So dogs, do you allow dogs on that beach?
We do allow dogs on a leash.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, most of the repeat visitors are super familiar with that rule at the beach and they follow that. But if we get new visitors, we often have to let them know. We do have signs up, but, people come down to have fun and they may not even take a look at the sign. So it definitely helps to have a physical presence on the beach to explain the policies and why they're in place.
Okay.
And the state beach doesn't allow dogs on the beach. Am I correct?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. Like, there are people, who, I think last weekend there was, a few campers had actually brought their dogs out with them to their towels on the beach, but they were being very low key about it. Like, they're keeping the dog right there and they were off to the sides away from the plovers. So, for myself, I just kind of thought, well, all right, they've clearly been talked to already. And at one point I saw one of the rangers go over and have a discussion with them. So, there, to me, the one thing I've noticed is, because there's so much human use right adjacent to these plovers at Carpinteria State Beach, that, from a docenting point of view or an education point of view, I feel like it's important to kind of keep an eye on the plovers themselves, because different plovers have different sensitivities. And like, if a plover's staying on the nest, even though someone is, playing outside the roped area, but fairly close to that location, that seems like it's okay, whereas for some reason, frisbees seem to really upset the plovers. If they're playing frisbee and they kind of come into that area, yeah, I think the plovers see it as a potential threat, an aerial predator of some kind. That'll get them up off the nest right away. So, and people have been really, understanding when I pointed out, and they're willing to go and play frisbee a little further down the beach. Okay, well, any other last questions before we let Jessica go back to her own infant? Yeah, I see you waving your hand.
Thank you. Hi, sorry I came in late. Then thank you for all the information. And John, thank you for those amazing photographs. I'm jealous. They're beautiful. Jessica, I'm wondering, I don't know if this was stated before. I'm sorry, I came in 15 minutes late, but do you know what the percentage of survival rate is, more or less, for these little birds?
So at our site, it's usually around 50 to 60% the survival rate. But you know, it does vary every year, and this year will probably be on the lower end, unfortunately, in terms of nest loss. So yeah, it's very variable.
And what are you computing that on the basis of? Is that like for the eggs that hatch, 50 to 60% fledge, or it's what are the numbers?
Oh, let me think. So fledging rates are probably more around 60 to 70. So once the chick is hatched, making it to fledging age is a little higher. But for nest hatching,
okay.
I would say it's probably 50% for however many nests that actually make it to hatching. And then from that point, maybe 60, 70% for fledging.
Yeah, we have fewer nests, so our N is smaller for our computations down here. So it looks like very dramatic, like, oh, we had this great success with the first nest, but then, not so much success since then.
No.
But yeah, well, fingers crossed, again, we've got those 2 nests out there that should get us some babies. The 4th of July weekend could be really interesting with babies running around.
Yeah, I think, was it 2 years ago that the chicks were supposed to fledge right on 4th of July as well? And they made it,
last
right?
year.
Yeah. Oh, that was last year.
Yeah, and all three of them made it last year.
So that's great.
It's
always a little scary when you have those big holiday weekends. You're like, please, please make it.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, well, fingers are crossed. Okay, well, thank you again very much for taking time. I know time is really at a premium when you have a young child to take care of.
No, I was happy to join and to learn about what's going on at Carpinteria firsthand. That's really great. And again, yeah, your photos were incredible. That was really neat to see.
Well, the subjects deserve all the credit there. I'm just I'm just sitting there checking them out, and yeah, it's a lot of fun to watch them. I've definitely learned, again, I feel like the more I watch them, the more I understand what's going on in their behaviors, and can kind of keep track of what they're doing in response to different sorts of threats in the environment, or just their little territorial disputes they get into. So I look forward to seeing them a lot more, and hopefully getting even more knowledgeable. But I'm more envious than even before of how much time you've been able to spend with the snowy plovers up there at Callender Point.
They're pretty amazing to watch, and yeah, every year you see some new behavior that you've never seen before, and you're like, I didn't know they do that. So yeah, the more time you spend with them, the more you fall in love with these little birds. So, and thank you all for what you're doing at Carpenteria. I think it's so exciting that this is now a solid breeding site. I can't believe there's been 9 nests this year. That's amazing. So,
and I think again, it's a tribute. I mean, I don't know, I can't prove this, but I think realistically, a lot of this local plover nesting expansion has to be due to the success of what you guys have been doing up at Callender Point. That really has, you went from no nests at all, not that long ago, to dozens of nests now every year, and it's very impressive. And we know from the banding program that a lot of your birds are showing up down here. We've had 2 different birds that have nested down here now that were part of the rearing program at the Santa Barbara Zoo that were released at Callender Point.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, well, thanks again, Jessica. You're welcome to stay to talk about wrens if you're interested in wrens. Otherwise, thanks again for participating.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Okay, so I'm going to go on now and talk about wrens, and I have a different presentation on wrens. I'm going to share my screen to show you. This is going to be a pretty quick wren talk. I didn't prepare a lot of detail about wren biology or it's mostly just about identifying the wrens, the wren species that we have a decent chance of seeing in Santa Barbara County. But they're a really cool group of birds. And I think from a birder's standpoint, a bird watching standpoint, they're a good group to get to know. There aren't too many of them, and they're all visually distinctive enough, like you can pick them apart pretty well if you get a good look at them. But of course, getting a good look at them is difficult because they skulk in the underbrush. They're hard to see, but they're also really loud, and their vocalizations are distinctive. So this is helpful. So here is a house wren from just around the corner from my house. We have a lot of them in Santa Barbara County. So here's the Ebird histogram for the 6 wren species I'm going to talk about. There's a few other wren species that if you're very lucky, you might see once in a while in Santa Barbara County, but really these are the 6 species you have a decent shot at seeing. House wren and Buick's wren, you pretty much can see throughout the year. Then we've got 3 more species that are less commonly seen: rock wren, canyon wren, and marsh wren. And here in the south part of the county, marsh wren and rock wren are probably pretty tough to see in the summer months. They're more fall and winter is when you're likely to see them. But in the northern parts of the county, certain areas you can go to and find them throughout the year. And who else have I got? And then finally, the Pacific wren is probably your toughest, well, clearly is your toughest species to find in Santa Barbara County. You need to be very lucky or be really focused, go to the places where they hang out, because there's a few spots that reliably produce them every year, but mostly in the fall and winter, not so much in the breeding season. But I'll go through them now. So here is, again, the house wren. And I'm going to go ahead and click out to the Ebird site to take a look at them. They're sort of overall brownish. Not a lot of really distinctive field marks. Tail length is sort of an important characteristic in a small brownish wren around here. House wren's tail is sort of on the medium length. And they do vocalize a lot. They are loud. So I want to go ahead and play an example of a house wren song, because you hear that a lot this time of year. And if you're in the right habitat around here, this time of year, you will hear them singing a lot. Oh, and I'm going to show, so this is a video I took of the same bird that was in that photo. And I wanted to talk briefly about the Merlin Sound ID app. So we've talked about it before, but just to mention it again, because I really think it's a great tool. This is the free app you can get on your phone that the Cornell lab puts out, the same people who do eBird. And basically you press a button and it will listen to the bird vocalizations that it can hear, and it will take into account your location and the eBird data for what species are common in the area at that time of year. And then it will make suggestions for what it thinks the bird is that it's hearing. And it's, again, super useful. So I just wanted to show a quick example. So here is a video that I made, just kind of show you a screenshot of my phone running Merlin Sound ID. So here I'm going to click on the app, start it up, and I'm going to click on Sound ID, and then hit this big green button to have it start listening. And I just played that same video's recording, and you could see it in real time identifying, oh yeah, there's a house wren. It also heard the Pacific Slope flycatcher that's in the background. And there's a spotted towhee you can hear. and there's a house finch in the background. So it's, you know, it's doing a very good job. You know, as I listen to that, I can pick out those 4 species, but it takes some work, and it's just doing it really well. So I encourage you to check that out if you haven't already. And I'll go on now to the Buick's Wren. So another fairly common species that we have around here. I think it would, you know, it tends to be more in the chaparral and the kind of rural habitats, where the house wren is more in the suburbs. I mean, it's also, there's a lot of overlap. They're both hanging out in these brushy habitats. But the Buick's Wren is more, you know, is less tolerant of people, although still pretty tolerant. Whereas the house wren, as its name kind of implies, is just fine hanging around people. So the you know, Buick's Wren has a relatively long tail, so a little bit longer tail than the house wren. Has this prominent eyebrow, this light area over the eye. A little lighter underneath than the house wren, which is more sort of overall uniformly brownish. And then it has a whole bunch of vocalizations. So kind of a similar character to the house wren song, but different. You know, if you listen to enough examples of it, I don't know. There's a lot of variety in Buick's Wren songs. I'm just going to play a few of them so you can kind of see what that's a very different song. It's got a similar character. There's a wren tit in the background there too. And one more example. So I brought this up before. Nick Letheby joked with me once. We were hearing birds and talking about what was out there, and he sort of grumbled and said, "Oh, the world would be a better place if it didn't have Buick's Wrens in it." And I know he was saying it for comic effect, but it still scandalized me a little bit. But that's what he's basically talking about. You know, they make so many vocalizations, and it can be very confusing because you hear this strange thing. It's like, oh yeah, it's another Buick's Wren. So getting familiar with their vocalizations is an ongoing challenge, at least for me. All right, and I'll move on now to canyon wren. So, so this wren is distinctive looking. It's got a relatively long beak. I mean, they all have long beaks. Wrens are mostly insectivores, and they like to probe with their long beaks. But canyon wrens have an especially long beak that they use for probing into crevices in rocks. And then it's got this sort of very distinctive look where it's got this rufous coloration that contrasts with a whitish throat on the underparts. And then the vocalization of the canyon wren is just amazing and very distinctive. It's like the full version of it. So that descending song is, you hear it in Western movies all the time. It's very cool song. That is the song of the canyon wren. And their calls are worth learning too, because sometimes you'll just hear that. Sort of an interesting. So again, it's, as with a lot of wrens, it's tough to get a look at them, but you can hear them a lot because they're very loud and they'll be out there vocalizing. So that is the canyon wren. And then rock wren So it's kind of got an interesting appearance. It's sort of got a, I don't know, an overall brownish kind of look. It doesn't have that real rufous underpart with the white throat that the canyon wren has. It's got a little bit of an eyebrow, with which the canyon wren really does not. You know, so it's got not quite as distinctive an eyebrow as the Buick's wren. A little bit of one. And its vocalizations are also quite distinctive. Here's another example. So something that's very interesting, you know, is when you're learning bird vocalizations, they don't just make one sound. You know, you have to kind of learn the whole repertoire that a species has, and different individuals will sound different. The same individual will have multiple different vocalizations that it makes. So again, that Merlin Sound ID is a very useful tool because it has used you know, machine learning processes to take a very large data set with lots and lots of examples and try and distill out what the unique characteristics of each species are. I should mention, I didn't say this before in connection with Merlin Sound ID, but it is not infallible. So, you know, you shouldn't just assume that it's, you know, the same as having a very expert birder who's confidently identifying that bird for you. It's a suggestion, and I don't know, 10% of the time it's wrong. So, you know, it's a very useful data point, and it can certainly help you if you're on the fence on an ID, and it can help give you an idea of what you might be hearing. But you should definitely, you know, confirm the information it's giving you with the usual, you know, bird identification process you would go through. And then marsh wren, which is really an interesting species. We have them in the Carpinteria salt marsh, not so much right now. I'm not sure that, I think they're rarely reported from there during the breeding, during the summer months. But in the fall and winter and early spring, they're pretty reliable there. You kind of have to go to the marsh and hang out and listen for them. And then if you're lucky, one will pop into view. So they have a little bit of an eyebrow again, so sort of similar to a Buick's wren, shorter tail. Its photo is unfortunately not very, I'm using my own photos for this, so you get bad photos, which I apologize. But it has a black back with these white streaks in it that no other local wren has. So if you see it, that's a good thing to look for. But I think the vast majority of marsh wrens that I've identified by hearing them. This is what they sound like. We'll play another individual. These are your marsh wrens. And then the last one, and actually I didn't have a photo of this one. I've never gotten a photo of a Pacific wren. I've seen them a few times, but not since I've been bird photography obsessed. And they are tough to get a look at. They are shy. They are, you know, we're right on the edge of the range, I think, here in Santa Barbara County. They're overall very sort of this dark brown with a very short tail. In fact, there's one report by a local birder I was chatting with a few years ago in Carpinteria Creek, which is one of the places where you might see a Pacific wren. Talking about, oh, I saw a house wren, but it had a really stubby tail. It must have had an interaction with a cat. And after further discussion, he ended up saying, oh, you know what? Maybe it was a Pacific wren. And there had been a report of Pacific wren from there. So it's likely that's what he saw. So looking at it in eBird, in fact, let me look at just show you the range map. No, I don't want this range map. I want the all about birds range map. Just do that. Yeah, so you can see we just barely get them. So in their wintering territory, not so much this time of year, but in the fall and the winter, a few of them make it as far south as where we are, but we are right on the edge of their range. So it's just a few really adventurous Pacific wrens that make it as far as where we are. So their songs, go back to the eBird page, are amazingly long. So I'm not sure that I've ever heard one singing, because again, we're not really in the reading range here. But that is quite a long song. The calls are more what I am familiar with. They sound like this sort of squeaky kind of call note. They like riparian habitat, so creekside, dense underbrush. Kinnavan Road up in the San Marcos Pass area of Santa Barbara is a place that tends to get them in the wintertime. For a few years, there was pretty regularly, they were at the Bates Road Bridge over Rincon Creek, just a few miles from here in Carpinteria. So that was a good place to get them. Didn't have them there last winter, or at least I didn't find one there. But that's another place you can try and find them. Where else? There's just look in eBird. There's a few places. If you're highly motivated, I have been highly motivated in the past, and it's only succeeded in a small percentage of the cases. So that's a little bit of a nemesis bird for me. I didn't get one at all last year in my county year list, and I tried. So I'll try again this year. We'll see how I do in the fall once they're around again. And that is it for wrens. All right, so that's it for our Wren discussion, unless there are questions or comments about wrens. Or any of you Wren fans? Well, yeah, Tom mentions, Nancy Barron had a really nice article in the Coastal View. She has a column, I forget the name of the recurring name of the column. The Coastal View is small. If you page through it, you'll be able to find it. But she has a really nice column where she talks about Carpinteria Birdwatchers, and she talks about bird song and Merlin sound ID. So that's one reason why I definitely wanted to mention it in this meeting. But I'm a big fan of her columns, and she uses my photos to illustrate them a lot. So I'm a fan of her using my photos as well. Okay, well,
In the Naturehood.
In the Naturehood. Thank you. That is the name of her column.
Yeah.
And it's not every week, but usually a couple times a month or once a month, something like that. She'll have
Yeah,
them.
it's great articles.
Yeah. Okay. Any other? We didn't really have time for sharing at the beginning because I wanted to get through the plover stuff quickly. Does anybody have any fun bird experiences? Yeah, Paul.
So as part of my nature deficit disorder, I like to go for hikes. And so this week I was up at Reyes Peak and into the Gene Marshall Trail. And house wrens are just going off up there. And also the chickadees. Wow, the chickadees are just really going. And then the green, what's it called? Green Rhine swallows.
Violet green.
Violet green swallows.
Yeah.
I was sitting in camp here, and these swallows were just bombing my head back and forth and everything too. And it was just amazing. So that's a very remote area up there, but boy, the bird sounds are really interesting. And of course, I had to use the sound a lot because I couldn't see a lot of them. They were just hidden in the conifers, but it's a really interesting area, very remote.
Yeah, so that's just over the border into Ventura County, right?
Yeah.
Reyes Ridge.
Exactly. Reyes Peak Ridge. There's two campgrounds, and you start off at what's called Reyes Peak, and you go out to Haddock Mountain, and you go down to Haddock, and you go left or to 3 Mile in a place called Pine Mountain Lodge. And so I'm going there again next week with a friend for 3 days, and we're going to hike all the way from Reyes Peak down to Piedra Blanca.
Oh, nice.
Good place.
Yeah, you
for
know,
birds. Anyway,
Linus Blomqvist, who's been in some of our meetings before, he just posted to the SBCO birding email list about a trip he did into Big Pine Mountain.
yep.
And you know, if you're weird the way I am, and you care a lot more about birds in Santa Barbara County than you do about the exact same birds, you know, 100 yards over in Ventura County. Big Pine Mountain is the place to go during the breeding times for these kinds of montane species.
Yep.
And his list was very impressive. I'm going to go ahead and share it again really fast. We're going to have a little bonus sharing content because I was just very exciting stuff. So this is his trip report from Ebird, and he basically hiked in from Santa Barbara Canyon, so up in the 33 and up in the northeastern corner of the county. Hiked in, and I think it was like a 3-day trip or 4-day trip. And you know, I heard from some folks who talked to him. He had bears and he had mountain lions and all kinds of excitement. But in terms of these, you know, he had common porwills, golden eagle. He had flammulated owl, which is a species I have never had in Santa Barbara County, and in fact I've never had it anywhere. And he has this recording of it. So it's the low hoot, the single hoot there. I'm not even sure what that species was. There's a western tanager that vocalized in there. It's a western wood pewee. Might be a canyon. I'm not sure. I don't know what that is.
Man.
Anyway, very fun stuff. So I was lucky enough to go on a summer trip to Big Pine Mountain 2 years ago and have not been back since. And Jenny, you know, Slaughter emailed just before this meeting. She wasn't going to be able to make it because she just got approval to go in through the Forest Service gates and go in there. So I think she's going to be in there this weekend. So I'm very excited to see what she comes up with. Anyway, yeah, sorry, I took your sharing and I took it over because I wanted to talk about Linus's thing.
That's okay, because that's an area that we can get back to sometimes. I work as a volunteer wilderness ranger in the backcountry, so I get a chance to go behind those log gates. But I'm just a birder starting out here, and believe me, I'm using that sound thing as much as I can. And
Excellent.
I know there's some error that you can have with it, but just to be able to sit out there and listen to birds, where I used to listen to crickets, now it's birds.
Well, the only other thing from listening to the recordings Linus attached to his Ebird list from last weekend, it was just so fun to hear these recordings where you don't hear cars, you know, you don't have all the urban noises that in all the recordings that, you know, you hear from the coastal plain here. It's you know, there's a lot of traffic in there.
Well, unfortunately, this is the fly zone here of airplanes going into Burbank and LAX. So that's the only back sound you get is the airplanes, and they're 24 hours. So it's unfortunate that particular Reyes Peak is a fly zone.
Okay, well, I'm interested in hearing. Maybe at our next meeting you can share what you saw when you went up there.
I will do that.
Any other fun birding outings? Speaking of fun birding outings, I forgot to mention at the start, we will be having our Carpinteria Birdwatchers outing this Saturday. We're going to go to Franklin Park, which is a teensy little park right at the start of the Franklin Trail. So it's sort of, you know, just a little bit south of Carpinteria High School along Sterling Avenue, I think it is. But there's a map on the Carp Birdwatchers webpage about the outing. So look forward to seeing you there. It'll be 8 o'clock on Saturday. Hope you can make it. I always see neat birds when I'm there. And yeah, you know, we I don't know, it's kind of the time of year where, I mean, the breeding birds are certainly interesting. The plover thing is super interesting to me right now. But in terms of rarities and stuff, you know, the diversity of birds is not very high right now. So there's a lot of interesting behavior going on. You know, you can see these birds doing the ones that do breed around here, you can see that happening. But in another month or two, maybe we'll start to get some post-breeding dispersal, and then we'll get some an influx of other sort of rarer species starting to happen. Okay, well, I'm hoping to see, let's see, we've got at least 3 snowy plover docents in this meeting. I didn't mention it, but thank you, Brody, for your snowy plover background. I really appreciate that, as always. Okay, well, I'm going to be out at the beach. I haven't seen the schedule that April has distributed, but she sent it out just before this meeting started, so I'll be checking it out. I assume it's going to be a similar schedule to what we've done the last few weekends. So the snowy plover docents will be out there. Chris and Tom and Laurel will be doing our part to educate and keep tabs on those birds. It was pretty slow. I mean, it's, you know, there's just the 2 nests and the 4 plovers, at least as of this morning. So it's sort of a calm before the storm, but I think once those eggs start hatching in a few weeks, it's going to get very exciting. And we'll see how we can do in terms of keeping those babies alive and get some more fledglings off the beach. Yeah, fingers crossed. Okay, well, thanks everybody. I had a lot of fun, and I will see you all next month, or I'll see you out on the beach, or I'll see you wherever we're bird watching.
Okay, thanks, John. Thank you.
Yep, so long.
Thank you. John,
Yeah.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Can I ask you?
You certainly can.
It's not about anything that you presented, and thank you again. Yeah, thank you so much. This is my first meeting that I've attended. It's great. The bats that used to fly around the creek in Carpinteria, I haven't seen them this year. And I read that, you know, bats have been in trouble and so do you know anything about that?
You know, I apologize, but I really don't. I mean, I see bats when I'm out bird watching late in the day, and I like them, but I don't really know much about bat conservation or bat status.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, I've only been here for about 4 years, but they've been there every year, and they're just, I haven't seen them. And I live at the lofts, you know, and they'd fly all around, and I haven't seen one. Anyway.
Tom, I know you and Laurel, you're right there by Carpinteria Creek. I would assume you're sort of in bat country there. Have you noticed any difference in your local bat numbers?
No, we really haven't seen bats here at this part of the creek. Yeah.
Okay.
Swallows, we used to see a lot of swallows, but we haven't seen them here at this part of the creek either lately.
Tom, did you see them before, years previous?
No.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Well, I'm going to pay attention now that you've raised the question, Chris.
And do we know how many juvenile red hawks there are around that area?
The red-tailed hawks?
Yeah.
Down at the beach?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, beach that right by the campground entrance. You know, I've heard one. I mean, I see one all the time. I mean, they're vocalizing.
I would defer to you. You know, you folks living down there in the Palm Loft. Like, I assume that they're a constant.
I mean, I've heard 3. I've heard 3. I don't know if that's the case or not. I was just curious if anybody knew. They're calling out, right? They're constant. It's
right. It's the young hawks yelling for their parents.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, we had breeding red-tailed hawks on the next street up on La Tierra Lane, I think, this year from where we live. And yeah, I just, you know, you hear them all the time.
Constant.
But I've sort of tuned them out. I'm not out there counting them, and I'm not sure down at the beach. You know, I'm there for the 2-hour plover shifts, or I'm there some other times, but I'm very plover focused when I'm down there.
Yeah, I know you are. Oh man.
Going back to bats. I remembered across from where we live, there's a little park called Carpinteria Creek Park, a very small little park. And I have seen bats there. But that was several months ago, so I haven't been.
Oh, okay.
We were planning on actually going there tomorrow morning. So maybe we'll see. We'll look around.
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
We need some bat watchers. We need Carpinteria Bat Watchers, a sister organization that can go out there and tell us what's up with the local bats.
I mean, there's so many insects. I don't know. Anyway, I love bats.
Taking them all, I say.
Yeah.
Swallows.
They were always competing, but whatever. Anyway, you know, it could be they just went away to a different neighborhood. I was just,
Yeah, I mean, bats and birds probably share that. They're highly mobile. You know, they're opportunistically moving around in response to available resources.
Sure.
So it can make it hard to keep track.
Maybe the highway work messed the whole thing up. Like
Yeah,
Yeah, I wonder about roost sites, did they roost under the overpasses? And then if they rebuild the overpasses, they're going to lose that.
right.
Might take them time to reestablish.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but the
Okay, well,
Callender has come back with Summerlin, so I've noticed. So,
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead then and
Okay.
close out the meeting officially, but thank you, everybody who's still
Thank
here for
you.
coming.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank